ended up sitting down with my parents, and thankfully my dad is kind of familiar with the world of like influencers and stuff. He's actually a publisher and has worked on a few different books with other content creators and influencers. So he was a little bit more on board. My mom was definitely a little bit more hesitant, just, typical mom, just like, are you sure you're going to be, this might be a huge mistake. And I feel like we live in a world where college is so pushed on us, like it is the only way to success. And that was definitely in the back of my mind too. And I'm sure in my parents' mind as well. And it's just like, what if this is the biggest mistake of my life? And, I could always go back to school, but then I'm going to be super far behind, and I don't even go back because I'm not very content with what I'm currently studying. And so my parents, they really let the decision be up to me. They've always been super supportive in whatever I do. And I just remember sitting down and really feeling like it was something I had to do. But I was so scared because I'm like, I've never made any money. What happens if this fails? But I'm definitely the type of person that once I commit to something, I'm all in. Failure isn't really an option for me. Like I'm okay with failing and trying again, but completely giving up is not for me. I'm like, I have to keep going. And if it pushes me in a new direction, that's great, but this is where I'm going to go. And I was like, you know what? I have this photography business that I kind of still had been doing into college. Like worst case scenario, I'll just be a photographer, but I need to drop out of college because my like heart is just pulling me in another direction. And so in that moment, I remember the day it was the first week back in second semester, and I went to class, and that weekend was out of class. Okay, sorry, this thing keeps happening. Why is this? I'm just gonna unplug. Oh my gosh.
It's weird because it skips a little bit when it does that.
I know. Okay. It might be better now. I'm just gonna take this out. I feel like this is being problematic. Can you still hear me fine?
Yep.
All right, we'll just go from here.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Been there many times, believe me, okay?
Yeah. So it was the first week back after into second semester, and I was going to class, and that weekend was the deadline to drop out and get your monies back for the second semester. And all week long I went and I was contemplating, I'm like, should I do this? Is this a huge mistake? And I just remember I got onto campus, and it was like a Thursday. So it was my last day of classes, and I was supposed to go to my final art history class. And I just stood there and I'm like, you know what? I'm done. And so I just walked back, and I got in my car and I drove back to my apartment, and it was like the best feeling ever. And it was a moment of like, just that like nervous fear, but also like extreme excitement, like of all the possibilities that could be happening. And so that's kind of a little bit about that moment. And then from there, I really just tried to work my butt off for the next like 6 months. Really, it was just all the time. I was probably putting in like 70, 80 hours a week sometimes. Wow. Just working with just emailing companies, trying to get collaborations. And in my first month, I think I made like $150. And then the second month it was closer to 300. And then it just started building. And then I was making a few thousand a month, and it just really snowballed into something that it is today. And so that's been going on for, like I said, almost 3.5, 4 years now. And it's been so cool just to watch it unfold, and just to look back at that moment and just see how far I've come from that point, and also to think about what would my life look like right now had I not done that in the first place and made that decision.
Oh, totally, for sure. And I like feel it in my stomach when you're talking about sitting in class and just being like, this isn't it. This isn't it. Mm-hmm. But the other side of that coin is dropping out of school at the age of probably 19 or 20, pursuing this thing that's not normal. And then just to reemphasize to people, I'm no social media expert, but when you go and pursue something like what you did, it's not like you were applying to an agency that then was going to sign you. This was Josie completely every day, in and out, making the pitches alone. Mm-hmm. Like that is just so fascinating and so badass to me that you had this one path that was like, you take this class, then you take the test, then you move on, then you go to the next grade, and then you move on. And you were like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go down this completely unbeaten path. And
yes.
That's incredible that you had the support from your parents. I think that makes a huge difference in
definitely
the decisions we make. And I was also,
so many people are afraid of what other people are going to think about them if they fail and different things like that. But I think when you're doing it solely for yourself and you don't care about what other people are going to think about you, it makes it easier to get to that point. And especially for me, this is something that this was my biggest dream. And I'm like, I think even if I just tried and it didn't work out and it led me somewhere else, I would be happier than just constantly wishing I would have done that and never knowing what would have happened. And also I think too, like you're saying, you can take risks, but I also think it's really important to be calculated when you do take risks. Right. I don't think it's okay. It's a good idea to be reckless. Fear can be, sometimes it's protecting you. Sometimes it's just holding you back. You have to kind of differentiate if this is a reckless decision or just a decision that it's a risk, and there's going to be pros and cons to both. And I am like a huge I am a huge list maker, and I will sit down, I'll write out pros and cons, how I'd feel if it went this way, how I'd feel if it went that way. And I actually did that in this situation. I'm like, okay, pros and cons, and if I drop out or if I pursue this dream. And the pros of how I would feel and what I wanted totally outweighed the cons. And that just really propelled me to want to make that decision ultimately and just go for it. And then I had a plan for myself. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to commit to this, then this is my schedule. This is what I'm going to do. These are the steps I'm going to follow to try to lift this dream off the ground.
That's amazing. And I think often when we're facing fear in whatever way it is, it's usually because you're thinking about going against the grain or stepping out of line or leaving the unexpected zones or comfort zones that society has created around us. So you usually have to be your biggest cheerleader. And again, like, it wasn't like she was going to go take a job somewhere. This was working for yourself at such a young age with no prior experience, no prior success, at least in dollars. You definitely had a lot of followers for that time of when social media was coming out. But what is your advice for somebody who's pursuing something new and they're trying to build it and they don't really have a lot of support? How do you be your biggest cheerleader in those moments?
Yeah, so it's actually funny because when I first did this, although my parents were supportive and very like familiar with all of this, almost like no one around me knew what the heck this was, especially, I mean, this was like almost 4 years ago. And I think content creators and influencers was a newer idea. Not everyone, I feel like you ask anyone nowadays and they know what an influencer is. Back then they did not. And I just remember like even like family friends coming up to me like, oh, how's college? And I'm like, not going. And they're like, oh, what are you doing instead? I'm like, oh, I'm posting pictures to Instagram for a living. And they're like, head scratch, like, and that was definitely discouraging. Like it, especially in the very, very beginning, it was almost like that, like little voice inside your head that's like, this isn't going to work out for you. No one else believes in you. No one even thinks this is a real career. And it can even be, I feel like when you do something that's risky, it can almost feel like embarrassing if you fail or mess up. It's just like there's so many emotions that you're going through. And again, it's just keeping your eye on the end goal. And to me, I'm like, when people would ask me that, I'm like, no, this is what I'm doing. And I started introducing it as to what I was doing instead of just saying I'm posting photos on Instagram or I'm trying to be an influencer. I'm like, no, I'm going to work with brands on a freelance basis and create content for them. And I started treating myself as a business even before I really was making money. And, not everyone's fears and like the risks that they're taking might entail business, but I think taking yourself seriously and saying, this is how it is, this is what I'm doing, and just being confident in that can help to kind of tune out those negative voices or the people who just don't understand what you're doing. And it makes it a lot easier just to focus on what you're going after. And now it's funny because now it's like the people who weren't quite sure what the heck I was doing now can easily see, oh, this is what she did. Yeah. And so it's cool to look back at that. But that's kind of what I try to do to not think about those, the people who don't believe in what I'm trying to go after.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, at night, whether, you know, you're married, partnered, whatever, you only go to bed with you. So are you happy with your decisions? Mm-hmm. Are you excited about your goals? It really is not up to anybody else. Mm-hmm. And that's, to pursue that, you definitely have to be unapologetic in that way. And remember to continuously cheer yourself on. And I should take, you know, I'm glad we're having this conversation right now because it's a good revisit for myself and running my own podcast while holding down a 40-hour week job and another part-time job that I have. And for me at this point, it's not about making money, although that would be really, really awesome. And I want to continue to educate myself to build it up to that. But I just have to remember my end game is to get stories like yours out there where you face fear and telling us how you overcome it. And at the end of the day, like that's really all I can ask for. So being your biggest cheerleader, I would say is kind of an up and down experience, but you really got to just keep it up there any way you can.
Yeah. And I will say too, like also for me being, getting to a point of where I am now, honestly, over exceeded any expectation I ever set for myself. My goal is just honestly to just be able to make some sort of a living, even if it's not that much at all, just doing what I love. I think that is the biggest thing, is that when you make a decision like this in life, being able to just do whatever sets your soul on fire and wake up and do that, even if it's in the form of a side hustle that's supporting you in some way, shape, or form, that's a success and that's a win. And I think people can get really hard on themselves because they set these huge goals for themselves and then they get upset if they don't make it there or it doesn't follow the timeline they were hoping it would follow. And I think when you make like risks and you go through experiences where you're very fearful of what could happen, it's just so much more important to celebrate the small wins along the way and just constantly remind yourself like, hey, I'm doing this because this is what I love, and keep moving from there.